Let's go Ravens! Nobody saw this coming. Seriously. When the first rumors started circulating, most people brushed them aside because we had heard similar stories before. But now that everything has unfolded, Ravens fans are looking at one of the biggest changes the AFC North has seen in years. A player who has terrorized Baltimore for season after season is suddenly gone, and the ripple effects could be much bigger than people realize. The craziest part? I don't think most fans have fully processed what this means yet. We're talking about a player who could completely change a game by himself. A player who forced offensive coordinators to lose sleep during game week. A player who made every Ravens fan nervous whenever Lamar Jackson dropped back to pass. And now, just like that, he's no longer standing in Baltimore's path twice every season. But before we get into all the details, make sure you've already hit that like button if you truly believe the Ravens are getting closer to something special this season. And I want to hear from the most optimistic fans in the flock today. Drop a comment below saying, "Go Ravens! Our best football is still ahead of us." I love seeing that confidence from Ravens Nation. Now, my opinion on this situation is simple. Anytime a player of this caliber leaves your division, it's significant. That's not disrespecting anybody else on Cleveland's roster. It's simply acknowledging reality. The source material makes it clear how much of a problem Myles Garrett was whenever Baltimore faced the Browns. You don't accidentally become the player that opposing fan bases celebrate leaving their division. That only happens when you've consistently impacted games at the highest level. At the same time, I think some people are focusing only on what Cleveland lost and not enough on what Baltimore gains. The Ravens won't automatically win more games because of this move, but they may no longer have to deal with one of the most disruptive defenders in football multiple times every year. That's a massive difference. And when you start thinking about what that could mean for Lamar Jackson, the offensive line, and the overall production of this offense moving forward, that's where this story becomes really interesting. Now let's get right into it. For Ravens fans, the reaction is easy to understand. Garrett has been one of the biggest headaches Baltimore has had to deal with over the years. Even during seasons when the Ravens found ways to win games against Cleveland, Garrett remained a constant problem. The source specifically highlights a game from last season in which Garrett recorded 4 sacks against Lamar Jackson in a single game. 4 sacks. Against one of the most difficult quarterbacks in football to bring down. That alone tells you everything you need to know about the level of impact Garrett had whenever Baltimore faced Cleveland. What makes this situation even more significant is that the discussion is not simply about a good player changing teams. The source repeatedly emphasizes that Garrett is viewed as one of the best pass rushers in football and one of the best overall players in the league. That is why his departure creates such a strong reaction. Ravens fans are not celebrating because a rival player struggled. They are celebrating because a player who consistently created problems for Baltimore is no longer scheduled to appear twice a year as part of a division rivalry. Another interesting element involves the comments surrounding Cleveland's coaching situation. The source references remarks indicating that the Browns head coach had not yet spoken with Garrett despite having been in the position for months. That detail became part of the larger conversation because it raised questions about the relationship between the organization and its star player. Whether that ultimately influenced anything behind the scenes is not stated, but it certainly became a major talking point as fans tried to understand how such a massive move could happen. The trade itself also sparked debate because some observers expected a much larger return package. According to the source, Cleveland received a first-round pick in 2027, a second-round pick in 2028, a third-round pick in 2029, and Jared Verse as part of the deal. While there is clear respect for Jared Verse and his talent, the discussion suggests surprise that the compensation was not even larger considering Garrett's status. After all, when a player is consistently described as one of the best defenders and one of the best players in football, expectations naturally become enormous regarding what a team should receive in return. From Baltimore's perspective, however, there is another layer to this story. The source repeatedly points out that even though Garrett is gone, Ravens fans cannot completely relax. Jared Verse is mentioned as a very talented pass rusher in his own right. The message is clear. Life may become easier without Garrett lining up against Baltimore, but the challenge does not disappear entirely. The Ravens will still need strong offensive line play, solid pass protection, and consistent execution whenever they face Cleveland. The broader impact goes beyond the Ravens and Browns. The source argues that this move changes the balance of competition throughout the AFC because Garrett was a player every team had to account for. His ability to affect games through pass rushing and overall defensive production made him one of the most disruptive forces in the conference. Now that he has moved to the NFC, the AFC loses one of its most feared defenders, while another conference gains him. Perhaps the biggest takeaway from everything discussed is how Ravens fans view the immediate football implications. There is optimism that Baltimore's offense could see improved production in future matchups against Cleveland. The source specifically mentions the possibility of better pass protection and stronger offensive numbers simply because Garrett is no longer standing on the other side of the line of scrimmage. That doesn't mean challenges disappear, but it does mean one major obstacle is no longer part of the divisional equation. At the same time, there is recognition that great teams cannot become comfortable. The discussion highlights how organizations continue searching for ways to improve even after successful seasons, using this trade as an example of aggressive roster building and a reminder that there are never excuses when it comes to pursuing improvement. And when you continue examining the impact of this move, one of the most interesting discussions from the source revolves around how much easier life could become for Baltimore's offense moving forward. Not because the Browns suddenly become a weak team, and not because every problem disappears overnight, but because there's a difference between facing a good pass rusher and facing someone who can completely take over a game by himself. The source repeatedly emphasizes that Myles Garrett was that type of player. He wasn't just somebody offenses had to account for. He was somebody who could completely wreck a game plan if given the opportunity. That's why there was so much excitement surrounding his departure from the division. The discussion points out that Baltimore's offensive numbers against Cleveland could potentially improve now that Garrett is no longer on the field creating chaos every snap. Whether that's rushing efficiency, pass protection, or quarterback comfort, there's a belief that the Ravens may benefit from not having to face him anymore. Of course, the source also makes it very clear that Baltimore still has plenty of difficult opponents to prepare for, and elite pass rushers exist throughout the league. The work doesn't stop simply because one major challenge has moved elsewhere. Another fascinating topic raised in the discussion is the question of how much worse Cleveland actually becomes after making this move. The answer presented is not as straightforward as some fans might expect. While losing a player of Garrett's caliber is significant, the source repeatedly reminds viewers that Jared Verse is still an extremely talented player. There is respect for what he brings to the table, and the argument is made that Cleveland is not left completely empty-handed on the defensive side. The Browns lose an elite player, but they do gain a young pass rusher who is viewed very highly in the discussion. At the same time, there is skepticism about how much this trade truly changes Cleveland's overall trajectory. Even before Garrett's departure, expectations for the Browns were not particularly high according to the conversation in the source. That perspective leads to an interesting conclusion. While the team becomes weaker without one of the league's premier defenders, some people already had questions about their outlook regardless of whether Garrett remained on the roster or not. The source also spends time discussing the ripple effect across the entire AFC. For years, teams within the conference had to prepare for Garrett's presence. Quarterbacks had to know where he was at all times. Offensive coordinators had to design protections around him. Offensive tackles had to survive 4 quarters against him. Now that challenge shifts to a completely different group of opponents. Instead of AFC offenses dealing with Garrett, those responsibilities move elsewhere. That represents a major change when you're talking about a player who is consistently described as one of the very best in football. There is also a broader lesson taken from the trade itself. One of the strongest themes throughout the source is the idea that organizations should always look for ways to improve. The discussion references how some teams remain aggressive even after coming close to achieving their goals.